Are you thinking about moving out of your primary home and turning it into a rental? Stop. Before you do that, you have to watch this video. It may literally cost you $500,000. Now, I know what you're thinking. You might have heard other mortgage brokers, real estate brokers, even me, right? Talk in the past about the best way to get great terms or the best way to get your first rental property is to simply move out of your primary into a new house and make that one a rental. Now, this video is going to point out scenarios where that does make sense, but so many people, it doesn't make sense. And I'm seeing it more in 2025 than ever before. People moving out of a home, turning it into a rental when it really does not make sense for a number of reasons. So before we jump into it, I'm Matt Gouget, Matt the Mortgage Guy. I've been doing this for over a decade. I've helped over 2,000 people either buy a home or refinance a current home. As an investor myself, I think that I can help investors see through the eyes of an investor and analyze things in a different way. And this video, especially for newer investors that might make a big mistake early on in their journey. So let's jump right in. First and foremost, before I get into all of the reasons, all the things I've seen where I've advised people not to turn their primary home into a rental, let's first start with reasons or scenarios where it might make sense. Because like most things, it's going to make sense for others. And for some people, it's not going to make any sense at all. So if you have a home that you bought as your first home that just so happens to have strong cash flow as a rental, meaning it makes sense as a rental, it might make sense for you. If you have phenomenal terms, and not only does it make sense as a rental, but you've got great financing on it. You know, I've got rental properties that I have 2.875 30-year fixed rate mortgages. They might not be the absolute home run best rentals, but those financing terms make it make sense to hold on to those as rentals. There might be scenarios where you're not going to lose a major tax benefit, so you hold on to it as a rental. And I think one of the important pieces to think about, you know, for some people, whether they have rentals at all, is like you want to be in that game. You want to be a landlord, or you want to at least look over somebody who's managing that property. You know, if you hire a property manager and you're not, you know, necessarily doing the day-to-day stuff, but it takes the right person. So with all of that out of the way, let me tell you some huge disadvantages to turning your primary residence into a rental. First and foremost, you move out of that primary residence that you've lived in for a number of years. If you sell, you have the primary tax exclusion where you're not going to pay capital gains as a single person up to $250,000 in gains, or as a married couple up to $500,000 in capital gains. So what I've seen, and this is something that I've seen in real life, people for one reason or another, like, no, I'm going to keep the house. And then 3 years later, they decide, no, we should sell it. And there might be $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 capital gain that they pay, you know, and they have to. It's an IRS rule, right? Like, yay, we made $400,000 in this house, but if you pay a 25% capital gains tax, you're sending $100,000 of that to the government. Whereas if you sold it as a married couple right when you moved, or within 2 years, you know, you can have it to where you've lived in it 2 of the last 5 years, you get to exclude that capital gain because it was your primary residence. You get a humongous tax benefit. So think about that and factor that in when you're making the decision on whether you keep or sell that home you're departing. Another mistake I see people make is they've got emotional attachment to this home and they make bad landlord decisions, or they've, you know, quite honestly over-renovated for it to be a rental. A rental property, when done correctly, should be based on numbers and profit and looked at like a business. You can't look at it as like, oh my gosh, Sally's first steps. And, you know, I really loved this kitchen. That's why we spent $175,000 remodeling it. Like, those are the types of things that are emotional and great for a home you live in, not so great for a rental property. Another thing to keep in mind where it might not make sense to keep your primary residence as a rental is the depreciation recapture tax later. So you move out, it turns into a rental. Good news about owning rental real estate is you get to write off depreciation on that rental. You know, it offsets any income you make from it because there's depreciation in there. Well, you do that for any number of years and then you go sell it and there's depreciation recapture. It's great in the tax years that you're taking advantage of writing off depreciation. It sucks when you sell, when there's that depreciation recapture. So a bunch of different stuff you can do. Maybe you 1031 exchange it into something else, but that's something to think about if you change your mind 5, 7, 10 years down the road. Another one I wrote down here is that, your home might not make a great rental. I think that goes along with the emotional attachment or the bad landlord decisions. Like, not all homes are great rentals. And sometimes I've got buyers who are buying their first home, knowing that they're going to buy something different in 3 to 5 years, and they'll look at it through an investment lens. Is this a good rental? I think that's a phenomenal idea. And I work with a lot of investors, a lot of young investors, that their game plan for investing in real estate is, I'm going to buy a primary, but I'm going to buy it based on the assumption that it'll be a rental later. In that case, you've already done the homework. It's half a mile from the university. Rents are strong here, things of that nature. But for a lot of people, you just bought a house in the neighborhood you wanted to live in, near the school you wanted to live in, and a price that you can afford and you can make the payment on. I see people that are moving out of their homes and the rental's going to be a $800 to $1,000 negative, meaning they're going to lose money every month on that. Like, if I brought you a scenario where I said, hey, give me $150,000, I'm going to put you in this investment that's going to lose $1,000 a month. You would never do that, right? But you might have $150,000 in equity in a home and you're thinking about keeping it as a rental and it's going to lose $1,000 a month. Don't do that, right? And there are scenarios and there's other factors, and this is not a one size fits all advice video, because maybe in the scenario where you're losing $1,000 a month, you've got a kid who's graduating college in 2 years, he's going to move back to that neighborhood. He's going to buy that house. That's going to be his first. I don't know. There could be a lot of stuff. But in general, if, rents don't justify and it's not a good rental, there might be HOA restrictions. High-end neighborhoods, generally the numbers don't make sense, like price versus rent ratio. Couple things to also think about, right, is how it affects your qualifying. Some people are trying to buy a move-up house, and if they keep the current house, even if they can offset with departing rents, it limits what they can buy moving forward, or it severely handicaps them with not being able to access that equity to put down on the next house and have a mortgage payment that they can afford. I love real estate, and so it almost pains me to say some of this stuff. Like, I want people to own real estate, own multiple pieces of real estate, because I know over 2, 3, 4 decades how much it's going to add to net worth, but I want you to do it correctly. And I don't want everyone to do it for the sake of doing it. Adding more real estate for the sake of adding it. You've got to do it correctly. So there's going to be some cases where, it doesn't make sense because it limits your buy forward. And you can buy rental property later on, but right now, let's get that house sold. Let's get you into your new home. Let's put enough down to where you're comfortable with the new payment. I'm seeing that quite a bit in this, we'll call it affordability crunch that we've been in over the last few years. Lastly, owning real estate isn't for everyone. I see this a lot, where owning real estate and owning investment real estate, man, oh man, it's glorious. And there's some magic in owning something that's appreciating over time, that somebody else is paying the debt on, so the debt's going down. You're getting that depreciation tax benefit. You might even get cash flow on top of it. You got 5 or 6 benefits all pouring on you. And then you wake up 3 decades later and you've got millions in real estate that's paid free and clear. You can sell it and exchange it. You can keep it and cash flow increases when there's no debt on it. There's all kinds of great stuff about owning real estate, but it's not for everyone. There might be some people that say, investing in ETFs is going to give me a return that's, maybe not as good over time as real estate, but it's easy for me. And I don't have to, worry about tenant turnover or damage risk or, maintenance calls, legal obligations, and things like that. So think about it before you do it. This is just a video to say it's not for everyone. Don't automatically turn your primary into a rental property without talking to somebody, going through the options and figuring out what works best for you. In some cases, like I talked about up front, it's going to be a great idea. And I've seen plenty of people do it successfully. Like I mentioned, you might even game plan for that and buy your first property with the thought that it's going to be a future rental. But do not do it automatically just because you're able to hold on to that great mortgage and buy something forward, with 5% down or something of that nature. Hopefully this was helpful. If me and my team can help in any way, just go to mtmg.com. Matt, the mortgage guy. I bought the domain mtmg.com to make it easy for you so you don't have to forget. When you email me, it's quick and easy. When you go to the website, it's just 4 letters. Interact with us there. Get in touch with us. Schedule an appointment. We're more than happy to help. I'm licensed in many states. I've got contacts in all 50 states. So if I can't help or someone on my team can't help, I can refer you to someone that can help. Hopefully this was helpful. mtmg.com. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.